basic male and female structure is different, and this would account for the different forms which females and men take, and the different psychologies involved in masculine and feminine attitudes. For the man, it's about expansion, about spreading the seed, about making do with whatever materials are available. He cannot pick and choose because for him life is short, as he is expendable and always challenged by others. For the female, things are a little more stable, and in fact stability is what she craves. For her, it's about selecting the best material to risk her life upon, because whenever a female is impregnated, in the wild at least, she takes on a risk. She takes on a personal risk. A risk which love, as an inebriating emotional factor, makes possible. Love being a sophistication, an evolution of the lust, coupled with, and lust being, I don't know if I've covered this before, but in my view, lust is an evolution of the feeding frenzy, of the need to for nutrition. Of course, this takes some explaining, which I'm not going to do at the moment. Therefore, this idea of hypergamy is nothing more than a social application of a natural process and a natural phenomenon, just as gender is a social application, social being symbolic, metaphorical, restricted by the system's requirements, the tribe's requirements, the communal requirements. Just as gender, I say, is a manifestation of sexual roles, natural sexual roles, so is hypergamy a social manifestation of natural female tendencies. You see, a female, in order to risk her life, to go through the gestation period and all the costs this entails, and later to endure the costs of bringing up an offspring, particularly a human offspring, with a larger brain which requires a longer period of weaning, would have to be more selective with what kind of genes she accepts within her. And this is why hypergamy is really a filtering process. A woman wants to marry up because she wants to make sure that whatever she brings to life will have first a chance of surviving, and then will have a better chance of dominating, reaching the top of the social ladder. Now, because a female is also easily integrated within a social system, she's easily seduced by the institution being an abstraction of masculinity. In modern times, she is governed by this contradiction, this internal conflict. On the one hand, she has her innate natural instincts, which is attracted to a particular type of man, an alpha male, with the physical and mental attributes this entails. And on the other hand, she's attracted to the socially successful man, the mimetic ideal, which in most cases, particularly in modern systems, comes in direct conflict, is in contradiction to the natural man. And I will explain why. You see, in order for a man to be successful within a social context, he has to submit to the rule of law. He has to submit to the institution. He has to give in. He has to subjugate himself. He has to emasculate himself, in other words. He has to embrace his beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, omega, whatever, status, and then make do. So a man who is successful in the system is successful only by playing within the rules, and only in climbing up the social ladder is he able or permitted to stretch these rules to his advantage and become part of the upper echelon. Up until that point, he has to subjugate himself. He has to tolerate being subjugated. The system allows him to advance if he shows the proper respect towards it. If he shows the proper submission to the system. That's why whenever you meet a rich person in a capitalistic system, what you are meeting is a man who has advanced to where he is by playing within the rules, up to the point where he could stretch the rules, of course. But that's another matter. The privileges of reaching the top are varied. This is one of them. The permission which is offered to stretch the rules within, again, certain limitations. So the socially successful man is not necessarily a male with the attributes of a naturally successful man, of an alpha male in nature. An alpha male in capitalism is not the same as an alpha male in paganism or an alpha male in the wild. So there's a conflict in the female. On the one hand, she's trained from birth to be attracted to the socially superior male. And on the other, she's also inheriting genes which are attracted to often the opposite, to the genetic manifestation of superiority, the genetic alpha male. And this is where the contradiction happens. And this is where the whole bullshit concerning female mystique begins. You see, a female is not mysterious at all. She's not mystical. She's not complex in any way. The only complexity in her is in her ability to hold in her mind two opposing views, two conflicting attitudes at the same time, and feel not obliged to harmonize the two viewpoints, to become, in other words, a whole person. This is why women often say that they need to fight themselves and stuff like that. This too is part of her genetic role, which entails the cost that I mentioned before. So the best way not to be confused by a female is to stop listening to what she says, because what she says is really lip service to the system, to the meme she was brought up in. So she will repeat the mantra, she will read from the text, so to speak. She will read from the Bible. She will regurgitate, she will parrot. And then she will act in ways which contradict it, because she cannot control herself, having no ability to understand who and what she is. This is where know thyself is so important. In order to control who you are, you must, first of all, know who you are, and then accept who you are. So intellect is the starting point. Then courage comes into play. And it's only males that can do this, because for males it's a matter of propagating themselves, of thinking outside the box, of challenging authority. But for a female doesn't come easy, and very few females manage to do it. So a female is always governed by conflicting drives. She's gonna imitate and repeat whatever social norms are prevalent in her time and her place. And then she will act in accordance with her nature, because after all, human civilization is relatively young in relation to the process of evolution. It's only a few thousand years, we can say, or maybe longer, but still it's not comparable to the hundreds of thousands of years of evolution which preceded the emergence of civilizations and the requirements of a tribe, which then developed into a culture and then into a civilization. The beta male, of course, being restricted, either because of natural inadequacies or because of social restrictions, must focus on the particular. This is why we see this desperation, or what comes across as desperation, in inferior males, in that they focus upon one female, and in so doing they become obsessed with this singular individual, which in most cases does not warrant such attention. Now the female interprets this, as she should, as a weakness. This is why the alpha male, the bad boy, is so attractive to the female, because he has more options. He can fuck this chick, or he can fuck another chick. It's because he doesn't emphasize so much the particular, the individual. In essence, he doesn't give a shit about the girl herself, because he has other options, which makes him attractive to women. I know it sounds screwed up, but that's how the conflict between memes and genes comes about, and how it manifests itself, and how we understand it as this conflicting, as this confliction, as this paradox. So a female might say that she's attracted to the nice guy, the guy with a sense of humor, with a nice job, polite, treats her with respect, and yet, intuitively, instinctively, she'll be attracted to the same alpha male who doesn't give a shit about her personally, who often treats her like shit, without of course going over the line, who doesn't care so much about her as a person, since for him she can be replaced. And this is the conflict inside of the female, this mimetic and genetic conflict, which often comes across as this complexity of thought, which is not that at all. And men should just, like I said, stop listening to what women say, because what women say will always be what is more popular, what is current, what is modern, and start watching what women do, how they act, how they choose, how they select, how they behave. But we can also see this effete demeanor in the beta males, these so-called MRAs, who, despite it all, cannot let go of the cultural norms. They cannot let go of the ideals, the principles they were raised by, and the system promotes daily, because they are totally submitted to them. They are totally dominated by them. And this also makes them less attractive to the females. And this is what's so ironic about the whole situation. The males supporting systemic principles, cultural norms, which they cannot help but accept because it serves them also, but mostly because they've submitted to them, because they can't think, they can't envision a world outside of them, they can't envision a world they can tolerate outside of them. By doing so, make themselves less attractive to these females, with whom they might agree on an intellectual level, because they're both submissive to the norm, to what we call modern. And yet, on an instinctual level, the female will find them weak, pathetic, unattractive. She might experience the sensation as an absence of sexual desire, an emotional disconnection, or whatever. Like women say, there's no chemistry between us and stuff like that. This is where the complexity comes in. So a beta male, a male who has submitted, who has been dominated by the system, which is the only alpha male permitted, might think that with this social success, because of his tolerance and his submission to the system, to the systemic rules, to the systemic values and principles, will attract any female he wants. But he will find this is not the case, because he might attract a female who is still governed by paternalistic values, or he might attract a female who, having made a couple of mistakes by going after the bad boys, is not willing to compromise, to settle, to sacrifice, and to deal with a male who she's not sexually attracted to, but she knows practically, she needs to give into in order for her children to have a better life. But if he's looking for a female who's genuinely attracted to him, then he will not find her unless he looks to the young. And this is another little issue. A lot of females say that they were sowing their seeds when they were young, and that afterwards they matured and stuff like that. Well, let me just explain this. When a female is young, she still hasn't realized what the rules are completely. She still thinks like all people think, like all young people think, that she can break the rules, that she's an exception to the rule, and so she will go for the male she's really attracted to. But as she grows older, this is where maturity sets in. She will forego her natural inclinations and will think more practically, more pragmatically. Sometimes having made a couple of mistakes means she has a couple of kids that make her situation even more restricting, more limited. So in this case, she might attract the nice guy who she needs to help her in the upbringing of the children she already has. And to do so, she might give in to this beta male, giving him a child or two just to keep him around. And we can see this in nature, how a female within a primate troop might give in sexually to an inferior male just to have him as an ally, just to keep him as a friend, which helps her within the tribal hierarchies. One more factor involved is something related to what I said before. Before I mentioned about the man who submits to the social norms and then succeeds within them. Now, I was referring there to a self-made man. And in this case, we can say that such a man at least has some intelligence. He's clever enough to make something, to make do, to make something of himself, to make do with his circumstances and succeed within them, and get what he might wish to get through the system rather than outside the system. Sometimes, if he's clever enough, he might even come to the realization that outside the system he would have less of a chance or no chance at all, and so he would become a staunch defender of the system he is given in completely and totally. He will defend its principles and its values and its methods, simply because he knows that without the system, which he may do within, he would either be dead or he would have no chance of reproducing. But there's, aside from this individual, this male, there's another type of male which makes things even more complex for females. It's the male who inherits status, who inherits wealth, who are lucky enough to have a father or a grandfather or a great-grandfather who was up to the task, and yet they themselves as individuals are not only genetically inferior but also inferior in every other way. Now, such males, despite it all, will still attract a certain kind of female, a female who doesn't care, who's willing to sacrifice her natural drives, who sees, or maybe she doesn't understand, but she sees, she intuitively understands, she subconsciously comprehends, although she cannot explain it consciously, and yet goes through with it for her own reasons, for her own particular deficiencies and restrictions and limitations. And so a male who inherits wealth and status will still find plenty of females to pass on his genes with. Now, before I close this segment, I want to conclude with a final type of female, which actually results in a monogamy, which is unforeseeable outside of morals and religion and culture and peer pressures. There is, of course, and I've met plenty of them, the intellectual type of female. That is, a female, though part of a gender that hovers around the mediocre, still manages to be a part of the upper levels. And so she has an intellect that is far superior than the average males. Now, such a female might become monogamous, might remain loyal and monogamous to a male, simply because she has less options available to her. Now remember that a female always wants to propagate upwards. That is, she will only submit to what is superior to herself on any level, on a social or a genetic level, on a mimetic or a genetic level. And so a female of a certain intellectual quality will consider mating with an average male, similar to an average female mating with an ape, with a beast. For her, the options are limited. She cannot find many males who are above her intellectually. And so, if she finds one, she will not risk this relationship she could not actually, because there's no other option to tempt her. There's no temptation. And this is where the female nature comes into play and makes her more loyal, more tolerant, more submissive than a male does. Because a male, even a very intellectual male, will fuck just pretty much anything he can get his hands on. Because let's say a male belonging to the upper 1% of the population, intellectually, let's say, will have no options. He cannot find a female on his level, nor does he want to find a female on his level. For him, a female is a means to an end. He always has to use a female as a resource, whereas a female has to also take into account the male's either social status or his mimetic quality, in other words, or his intuitively, instinctively, subconsciously, his genetic quality. And so for a female who's on the upper 1% of her genders, her sexes, average, then if she finds a male who's above her, she will have less options to tempt her into cheating, which is not the case for the male. It is this very nature of a female, this very drive a female has, instinctual drive, to seek out what is superior and then to submit to it, which makes her so easily malleable and tolerant and so easily integrated. You see, for the female, the system, the institution, God, a religion, whatever, is the ultimate masculine authority, the ultimate masculine power. When she finds one, or when she's exposed to one, which no other masculine entity could compete against, then it's very difficult for her to change, to switch sides. This is why, by making God, let's say, omnipotent, what is essentially occurring is that the masculine entity is placed so beyond the males, the biological males' propensity, ability to attain, let alone surpass, that all must submit to him with a capital H. For females, this comes easy. For the emasculated male, this is harder. Yet, the less sense of self he has, and the less masculine he is, genetically speaking, the more he's prone to bow before such an entity, and then to settle there, to be happy there, beneath the shadow, within the shadow of such an all-encompassing, overbearing, unsurpassable masculine power. And this is why the female demeanor is so preferable for social harmony, for internal social harmony. And this is why the system, particularly as it grows more sophisticated and more universal, more global, prefers the emasculated, the effete male, even if this effeteness displays itself as a turning away, as a burying oneself in the sand, burying one's head in the sand, pretending the world is not there, immersing oneself in artificial realities. In fact, the system, as we know it, creates artificial realities within itself, in order to stabilize itself, in order to restrict conflict, internal stresses, internal conflicts. This is why it promotes these ideas of tolerance and uniformity, and love being the ultimate. Just as a female in nature, with love, can be inebriated to take risks she would not normally, rationally take, so too love is promoted within social structures to create this internal harmony, this internal order. Now, to understand what love is, one must understand why it comes about and where it comes from. The natural drive of the organism is one of fight or flight. This is the pre-programming of genetics. But if we think about it, this would inhibit reproduction, since reproduction, the heterosexual kind, requires proximity. Not only that, it requires the intrusion of an alien body within the female. And then this later requires social integration, interaction with essentially organisms that are not of the self. So lust is a first step towards love, towards the social concept of love, the maternal love, and then later the social construct of love. With lust, we get this inebriation, this chemical inebriation of the mind, this sort of madness, which exhibits itself in a primal state as almost a feeding frenzy, with biting, with scratching, with mock aggression, and so on. And yet, we can see in the species that mate in this way a sort of push-pull, this antagonism, and yet this compliance as well. And I think it's because of the instinct itself. The brain is flooded with these biological, biochemical reactions that prohibit the pre-existing naturally pre-programmed reactions to an alien entity, which is fight or flight. And so it enables reproduction. Now later, in order to facilitate this process and also to facilitate the emergence of higher-brained entities, which results in social interactions, love had to evolve again as an inebriating process, a biochemical inebriation, which floods the mind with chemicals that inhibit intolerance and the naturally evolved fight and flight survival mechanisms. Now from this we can see that love is not some transcendental thing, some transcendental emotion, but it is nothing more than a advancement, an evolution, which inhibits pre-existing reactionary, evolutionary behaviors in order to facilitate newer, more sophisticated, more successful behaviors. That's all it is.